Rain hit the glass dome of Astor Hall like thousands of fingernails trying to claw their way inside. No one spoke while Soraya Vale walked to the center of the chamber. 43 citizens stood in silence around the silver judgment circle. Elders in moon-thread robes. Spirit knights in black armor. Families holding their children a little closer as she passed. No one looked at her face for long. They looked at her wrists instead. 3 exile brands already burned into pale skin. Tonight she would receive the 4th. A death sentence without the courtesy of burial. The High Oracle unfolded the decree with hands so old they trembled against the parchment. Soraya Vale, he said, voice echoing beneath the crystal ceiling. You have failed the summoning rite for the 4th consecutive year. The words landed without weight anymore. Failure. Empty. Hollowborn. She had heard them so often they no longer sounded cruel. Just repetitive. You carry no spirit beast, the oracle continued. No celestial resonance. No sacred tether. A pause. By the laws of Astor Hall, you are declared soulless. A murmur spread through the crowd like wind through dead grass. Soulless. The worst thing a person could be. Not evil. Not dangerous. Useless. Soraya kept her spine straight. That, at least, she had learned. Never bend in front of people waiting to watch you break. Rainwater dripped from her dark hair onto the marble floor. She had walked here through a storm because no escort had volunteered to touch her. Above the council platform, enormous mirrors lined the walls from floor to ceiling, sacred relics meant to reflect the truth of every soul. None of them reflected Soraya correctly. They never had. In every mirror, she moved half a second too late. Like her reflection was thinking before choosing whether to imitate her. Most people avoided noticing it. Tonight, no one looked at the mirrors at all. The High Oracle swallowed. Even he looked uncomfortable now. You will surrender the Veil sigil, he said quietly. You will leave the Eastern Territories before sunrise. Still Soraya said nothing. The silence unsettled them more than screaming would have. One of the younger counselors finally snapped. Do you understand what is being said to you? Her eyes lifted slowly. Gray. Empty looking at first glance. Until someone held eye contact too long and realized emptiness was not the right word. Exhaustion was. Yes, she said. The counselor frowned. Then why are you standing there like this? Soraya almost laughed. Like what? Human? You want grief, she said softly. But grief requires surprise. The room went still. Somewhere in the chamber, a child whispered. Mom? Why don't the mirrors like her? His mother pulled him back immediately. Don't look directly at her. Soraya's chest tightened for exactly 1 heartbeat. Then the feeling disappeared again. That was the frightening thing about loneliness. Eventually it stopped hurting. It simply became the weather inside you. The High Oracle cleared his throat. The exile mark. A guard stepped forward carrying the branding iron. Silver white. Glowing with spirit fire. Normally, 2 knights restrained the condemned. Not tonight. No one wanted to touch her. Soraya extended her arm herself. The guard hesitated. For a split second, genuine fear crossed his face. Not because of her. Because the mirror behind her had moved. The reflection tilted its head before she did. The guard stumbled backward. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Soraya turned sharply toward the glass. Now the reflection stood perfectly still again. Exactly matching her. Like nothing had happened. Her pulse thudded once. There it is again. The oracle's voice cracked across the silence. Finish it. The branding iron pressed against her wrist. Burning pain exploded through her arm. The smell of scorched flesh filled the chamber. 4th mark. 4th rejection. Soraya's fingers curled slightly, and every mirror in Astor Hall shattered at once. The explosion of glass sounded like a gunshot inside a cathedral. People screamed. Silver fragments rained across the marble floor. The guards drew weapons instinctively. The spirit lights overhead flickered violently. And for 1 impossible second, every broken shard in the room reflected not Soraya, but something standing behind her. Tall, shadowed, female-shaped, its eyes glowing. Pale silver inside the fractured glass. Watching, waiting. Then darkness swallowed the reflections. The chamber plunged silent. No one breathed. No one moved. The High Oracle stared at Soraya with blood drained from his face. Not disgust anymore. Not pity. Terror. Soraya looked around slowly. At the shattered mirrors. At the people backing away from her. At the guards gripping their weapons with shaking hands. And suddenly, for the first time in her life, A terrible thought entered her mind. Maybe they were right to fear her. Not because she was broken, but because she had never been empty at all. The storm outside deepened. Thunder rolled over Asterhall. And somewhere far to the north, beyond the frozen mountains of Noctis, a man woke from sleep with his hand clenched against his chest, as if something ancient had finally opened its eyes. Soraya left Asterhall before dawn. No one escorted her to the gates. No one said goodbye. The city simply opened its doors and let the storm carry her away like unwanted ash. Rain soaked through her cloak within minutes. Cold water slid down the fresh exile brand on her wrist, turning the burn raw and vicious again, but she barely reacted. Pain had become background noise years ago, like breathing, like silence. Behind her, the silver towers of Asterhall disappeared slowly beneath fog. She did not look back. People always imagined exile as dramatic. Crying, begging, rage. But real exile was quieter than that. It was walking away while knowing nobody would come after you. The eastern road curved toward the Black Veil Ravine, a dead stretch of land abandoned long before Soraya was born. Spirit beasts refused to cross it. Travelers vanished there often enough that maps had stopped pretending it was safe, which made it the perfect place to send someone unwanted. By nightfall, the storm had weakened into freezing drizzle. Soraya stood at the edge of the ravine and stared down into the endless dark below. The fog there moved strangely, not with the wind. Against it, she adjusted the strap of her pack and started downward anyway. The deeper she walked, the quieter the world became. No birds, no insects. Even her footsteps sounded distant, swallowed immediately by the mist. The Black Veil did not feel empty. It felt like something holding its breath. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time behaved strangely in the ravine. At some point, Soraya realized she could no longer hear the rain above. Only the sound of her own breathing, and another sound beneath it. Soft, trailing behind her. Step, step, step. She stopped walking. The sound stopped too. Her fingers tightened around the knife at her belt. Slowly, she turned. Nothing. Only silver fog drifting between dead trees. Soraya stared for several long seconds before continuing forward. Step, step, step. Again, always half a beat behind her. Like an echo learning how to walk. Her pulse remained steady, but something colder moved beneath it now. Not fear. Recognition. The ravine opened suddenly into a shallow basin filled with black water. An old shrine stood at its center, half sunken and rotting. Soraya crossed carefully over broken stone. The surface of the water reflected the moon above, except the moon was wrong. In the reflection, it was red. She froze. The water showed her standing alone beside the shrine. But the reflection version of herself was not still. It was looking directly at her. A full second before she looked down, Soraya's breath caught. The reflected girl tilted her head slowly. Smiled. Not kindly. Then the water rippled violently. The image vanished. Soraya stumbled backward, nearly slipping on wet stone. What are you? She whispered. No answer came. Only the distant groan of wind moving through dead branches. She pressed trembling fingers against her eyes. Too tired. That was all. Exhaustion. Trauma. For exiles could fracture anyone eventually. But deep inside herself, beneath logic, another truth had already begun unfolding. The mirrors had shattered. The reflections had moved. And somewhere underneath all the fear was one impossible thought she could no longer bury. What if I was never the mistake? Night settled fully over the ravine. The temperature dropped hard enough to numb her hands. Soraya found shelter beneath the broken remains of the shrine and built a small fire from damp wood that should not have burned. Yet the flames rose easily, silver white instead of orange. She stared at them for a long time. The firelight reflected in the black water nearby. This time, her reflection matched her movements perfectly, almost disappointingly normal. Soraya laughed softly under her breath. A tired, humorless sound. Now you behave? The reflection smiled again. Her laughter stopped immediately. Slowly, very slowly, the reflection lifted one hand. Soraya had not moved. Cold rushed through her veins. The reflected hand pressed against the surface of the water from inside the image, like someone trapped beneath ice. And then another hand appeared beside it. Not hers. Long fingers. Shadow black. Something underneath the reflection was trying to reach her. The fire exploded outward. Silver flames surged violently through the ruined shrine. The black water hissed. The reflected hands vanished instantly. Soraya stumbled back against the stone wall, breathing hard. The silver fire circled her without spreading. Protecting. Watching. Alive. She stared at it in horror. No. The flames moved closer. Not threatening. Almost responding. A memory surfaced suddenly. 7 years old. Standing before her first summoning mirror. The priests whispering. The glass turning black the moment she touched it. One of them saying quietly, "She isn't empty." Another answering, "Don't say that out loud." Soraya pressed both hands against her mouth. For years she had believed the first half of the sentence. Empty. Broken. Wrong. But now, alone in the dead silence of the ravine, another possibility unfolded slowly inside her, like something waking after a long sleep. Maybe they had hidden the second half from her for a reason. The silver flames dimmed gradually. The basin fell quiet again. Soraya sat awake for hours afterward, staring into the darkness, thinking about all the times people avoided touching her. All the times mirrors reacted strangely. All the times spirit beasts became agitated near her. Not disgust. Not rejection. Fear. The realization should have felt empowering. Instead, it made her feel unbearably alone. Because if she truly was something different, then there might be no one else like her left in the world. Near dawn, exhaustion finally pulled her into shallow sleep. And deep in the frozen northern territories of Noctis, Kale Voran woke suddenly from a nightmare he could not remember. His spirit beast was snarling inside his chest. Restless. Alert. Listening. As though somewhere far away, something ancient had finally spoken its first word. Morning came gray and silent over the Black Veil ravine. Soraya woke with cold stone beneath her cheek and silver ash scattered around the ruined shrine. The fire was gone. No smoke. No embers. Nothing except a faint circle burned into the ground around where she had slept. A perfect ring of pale silver. She stared at it for a long moment, then stood without speaking. Some part of her already knew that if she tried too hard to explain what had happened during the night, she would lose her nerve and start lying to herself again. So she packed quietly and kept walking north. The ravine changed as she traveled deeper. The fog thinned. The trees grew taller. And strange things began happening around her. Dead branches bloomed with frost-white flowers when she passed too close. Frozen streams cracked open beneath her footsteps even in sub-zero cold. Once, an injured shadow fox crawled out from beneath collapsed rocks and stared at her with terrified silver eyes before fleeing in the opposite direction whimpering. Animals feared spirit users. But this was different. This felt instinctive. Ancient. As though creatures recognized something in her before she did. By the third day, Soraya stopped trying to convince herself it was coincidence. The realization sat heavy inside her chest. Not panic. Not excitement. Just a growing certainty. I am not what they said I was. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it frightened her more than exile ever had. Because if the councils were wrong, then what exactly was she? The answer came sooner than expected. Near sunset, Soraya reached the edge of a frozen pass known as the Hollow Teeth. Narrow cliffs lined with jagged black stone. A terrible place to be trapped. Which was exactly why the scavengers waited there. 3 men emerged from the rocks ahead. 2 more. Behind. Not spirit knights. Not trained soldiers. Just desperate drifters armed with rusted blades and hunger. The tallest one grinned when he saw her alone. Well, he said, looks like the veil spat one back out. Soraya's hand moved slowly toward the knife at her belt. Keep walking, she said quietly. The men laughed. One circled behind her. No caravan. No spirit beast. No escort. The tallest man tilted his head. Exile. She didn't answer. His eyes dropped immediately to the burn marks on her wrist. Understanding flashed across his face. Then amusement. Oh gods, he laughed. A hollow. The others relaxed instantly after hearing it. Because hollow-born girls weren't dangerous. Everyone knew that. You've got supplies, another man said. Leave the pack and maybe we don't carve up that pretty face. Soraya's fingers tightened slightly around the knife handle. But inside, beneath fear, something else stirred. The same sensation from the shrine. Warm. Waiting. Watching. The tallest scavenger stepped closer. Did you hear me? Yes, Soraya said softly. Then the reflection beneath his boots moved before he did. The frozen ground mirrored faint shapes in the evening light. And in that reflection, her shadow reached toward him first. The man froze. What the hell, too late. Silver frost exploded across the stone. Not from the air. From underneath him. Ice shot upward in jagged lines around his legs, trapping him instantly. The others shouted in panic. Soraya stumbled backward, staring at her own hands. I didn't. One of the scavengers lunged at her with a blade. Instinct moved faster than thought. The warmth inside her chest burst outward violently. The world flashed silver. Every reflective surface nearby ignited at once. Ice. Metal. Frozen water. Glass like stone. Her reflection appeared everywhere simultaneously. Dozens of silver-eyed versions of herself surrounding the pass. The attackers stopped dead, because the reflections were not copying her movements anymore. They were watching. The lunging scavenger swung anyway. The nearest reflection moved first. It stepped out of the ice wall like liquid moonlight. Not fully human. Not fully shadow. Its hand caught the blade midair. The metal froze solid instantly, then shattered. The scavenger screamed and fell backward. The other men ran. Not strategically. Not bravely. They fled in blind terror down the mountain path, without looking back. Within seconds they were gone. Silence crashed over the pass. Soraya stood trembling in the center of the frozen stone. The silver figure still remained beside her. Female-shaped. Tall. Its face looked almost like hers, but older somehow. Ancient. Its eyes held no cruelty. Only recognition. Soraya's voice barely worked. What are you? The figure reached toward her slowly. Not threatening. Almost gentle. The moment its fingers brushed her wrist, memories exploded through Soraya's mind. Mirrors cracking. Ancient cities beneath moonlight. Women standing inside circles of silver fire. A voice whispering across centuries. You were never empty. Soraya gasped and collapsed to one knee. The vision vanished instantly. The silver figure dissolved back into reflected light. Gone. Only frost remained. Her breathing turned ragged. The exile brands on her wrist burned hot beneath her skin. For years those marks had represented shame, failure, absence. But now they felt like lies carved into her flesh by people too afraid to understand what stood before them. Tears blurred her vision suddenly. Not from weakness. From exhaustion. From carrying the wrong identity for too long. I'm not hollow, she whispered. The wind moved softly through the cliffs. And for the first time in her life, the words felt true. Far north beyond the frozen territories, Cale Voran stood abruptly from the war table inside Noctis Keep. The silver wolf spirit behind his ribs had surged violently, without warning. Every candle in the chamber flickered pale white. The general stared. Cale ignored them, because for one impossible second, he had seen her. Not clearly, just silver eyes reflected through ice. And heard a voice inside his mind that did not belong to him. Awake. Cale Voran did not believe in omens. Not anymore. Men who ruled long enough learned quickly that prophecy was usually just fear wearing ceremonial robes. Facts mattered. Borders mattered. Supply. Routes. Military treaties. Winter reserves. Not dreams. Not instincts. Not the violent pull currently tearing through his chest like a hooked chain. The war chamber inside Noctis Keep had gone completely silent. Every candle along the stone walls burned silver white instead of gold. The generals around the table watched their ruler carefully, without speaking. Cale stood motionless at the head of the map table, one gloved hand pressed flat against ancient wood. His spirit beast was awake. Fully awake. That alone was wrong. The silver wolf inside him had not lost control in 11 years. Not during wars. Not during assassinations. Not even during the blood siege of Vare Hollow, when Cale had stood surrounded by burning bodies and held the northern line alone until sunrise. But now it paced violently beneath his ribs. Alert. Restless. Listening. To her. Cale's jaw tightened. Again. That image again. Silver eyes reflected through ice. A voice inside his mind. Awake. Your Grace. Roth Draven finally broke the silence. Commander of the Northern Guard. Old friend. One of the only men alive willing to speak first when Cale looked dangerous. The Alpha Lord did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the map, specifically on the southern territories beyond the Black Veil Ravine. Something crossed the veil, Cale said at last. One of the council elders frowned. That region has been dead for decades. Yes. Then what exactly are you suggesting? Kale finally looked up. The room stiffened instinctively, because there was something wrong with his eyes. Silver light flickered faintly beneath the irises of both pupils, his spirit responding too strongly. There is a presence moving north, he said quietly. Ancient. The elder gave a cautious laugh. With respect, Your Grace, ancient powers do not simply wander out of forgotten ravines. Kale's expression did not change, but the candles dimmed instantly. Every shadow in the chamber stretched sharply outward. The elder stopped talking. I am aware, Kale said softly, of what should be possible. Silence returned immediately. Roth watched him carefully. You saw something. Not a question. Kale exhaled slowly. Yes. What? A pause. And for the first time in years, Kale found himself struggling to explain something he did not fully understand. A woman, he said finally. Several council members exchanged glances. The elder nearest the south wall actually looked relieved. A spirit vision? No, Kale's answer came too quickly. Too certain. His fingers curled slightly against the table. It was real. The silver wolf surged violently again beneath his ribs. A flash, frozen cliffs. Silver light. Fear. Loneliness, so deep it felt bottomless. Kale inhaled sharply. The emotion wasn't his. The realization hit hard enough to freeze the room around him. Not metaphorically. Actually, thin layers of frost crept across the war table beneath his hand. Roth stared. Kale. The Alpha Lord pulled his hand away immediately. The frost stopped spreading. Control returned in visible layers. But the damage was done. Everyone in the chamber had seen it. Their ruler, who had mastered his spirit bond so completely people called him emotionless, had just lost composure over a stranger. Dangerous. Politically catastrophic. Kale knew it instantly, which meant he also knew exactly what came next. Fear. Questions. Whispers. The council elder spoke carefully now. Your Grace, if an unknown spirit wielder is approaching the northern territories, protocol demands containment. Containment. Interesting word. Not welcome. Not investigate. Containment. Kale looked toward the southern mountains again. Something cold settled inside him. Because without understanding why, the thought of chains around that silver-eyed stranger triggered immediate violence inside his chest. The wolf hated the idea. No, not hatred. Protectiveness. The realization disturbed him far more than the vision itself. Roth noticed. Of course he noticed. He always did. You feel connected to her, the commander said quietly after the others left the chamber. Only the two of them remained now. Snow hissed softly against the fortress windows. Kale said nothing for a long time. Then, yes. Roth leaned back against the table. That's impossible. I know. Spirit bonds don't form before meeting. I know. Then what exactly is this? Kale's gaze darkened slightly. That, he said, is the problem. Because deep down, beneath discipline and logic and years of ruthless self-control, he already knew this was not random. The silver wolf had recognized her. Not as prey, not as threat, as something lost, something ancient, something that belonged beside it. Kale hated how much the idea unsettled him. He had built his entire rule on certainty, on control. This felt like standing near the edge of something vast enough to swallow both. A knock interrupted the silence. One of the border scouts entered quickly, breath fogging in the cold air. He knelt immediately. Your Grace, we found signs near the hollow teeth. Kale stilled. What signs? The scout hesitated. 5 scavengers fled the pass this morning. That's not unusual. No, sir. But, the man swallowed. They're claiming a ghost attacked them. Roth groaned quietly. Kale did not move. What kind of ghost? The scout's face had gone pale beneath frostbitten skin. They said mirrors moved inside the ice. Silence. The scout continued shakily. And that a woman made silver fire appear out of nowhere. The silver wolf exploded forward inside Kale's chest. Not rage. Recognition. Kale was already moving before the scout finished speaking. Roth blinked. You're leaving? Yes. With what force? None. That's reckless. Kale stopped at the doorway. Snow whipped violently outside beyond the fortress walls. His voice lowered slightly. If I bring soldiers, he said, she'll run. Roth studied him carefully. You sound very certain. Kale's eyes lifted toward the southern mountains. Toward the frozen passes beyond the veil. Toward her. No, he said quietly. For the first time in years, uncertainty crossed his face openly. I sound afraid I'm already too late. Snow began falling harder the closer Soraya came to Noctis. Not soft snow. Northern snow. Sharp. Wind-driven. Cold enough to slice through wet fabric and settle inside bone. By the time the black walls of the northern fortress appeared through the storm, her hands had gone numb around the straps of her pack. Noctis rose from the mountains like something carved out of night itself. Massive. Obsidian towers. Silver-lit windows. Walls lined with spirit fire that burned pale blue against the blizzard. Alive. Watching. Soraya stopped at the edge of the outer bridge. For a moment she simply stared. This was the last territory in Ilarion powerful enough to reject her publicly. If Noctis turned her away too, there would be nowhere left. The thought should have hurt. Instead, she only felt tired. A horn sounded from the walls above. Movement immediately erupted across the battlements. Archers. Spirit knights. Silver banners whipping violently in the wind. They had sensed her before she even reached the gate. Of course they had. The great iron doors opened halfway. Not welcoming. Defensive. 6 northern knights emerged in black armor marked with silver wolf insignias. Their captain stepped forward. Tall. Scar over one eye. Hand already resting on the hilt of his spirit blade. State your name. Soraya Vale. The moment she said it, something shifted in the air. The guards exchanged glances instantly. Recognition. Not of her. Of the rumors. The hollow girl. The exile. The one from the shattered mirrors. The captain's gaze dropped to the 4 brands burned into her wrist. His expression hardened immediately. Purpose for entering Noctis territory? Soraya hesitated. Because the truth sounded insane. Because I think something here has been calling me. Instead, she said quietly, I need audience with Lord Kael Vorin. That earned an actual laugh. Not cruel. Disbelieving. One of the younger guards muttered. Gods, she really walked all the way here for that. The captain didn't smile. No one requests audience with the Wolf of Noctis directly. I know. Then why ask? Because your name is the only thing my instincts stopped running toward. Soraya swallowed the thought before it escaped. I have information relevant to the northern territories. The captain studied her carefully now. Snow gathered slowly on his armor. What kind of information? She thought of the reflections in the ice. The silver figure. The thing inside the shrine. The kind that gets people killed if ignored. Silence. The wind howled between the mountain walls. Then, one of the mirrors, mounted beside the gate, cracked suddenly down the center. Every guard stiffened. Soraya closed her eyes briefly. Not now. The captain noticed. His hand moved fully onto his weapon. What did you do? I didn't touch it. Another crack splintered through the glass. The younger guards backed away instinctively. Fear moved through the group, fast now. Not ordinary fear. The old kind. The kind people carried toward things that violated natural law. The captain made his decision immediately. Search her. 2 guards approached cautiously. Soraya stood still while they checked her cloak and bag. Dried food. Knife. Water skin. Nothing else. No spirit artifacts. No hidden weapons. Yet the mirrors behind them continued cracking one thin line at a time. The youngest guard finally whispered, Captain, I see it. No, sir. His voice trembled. Her reflection. Everyone looked. The gate mirror still hanging intact beside Soraya reflected the falling snow. The guards. The open bridge. But Soraya's reflection was gone. Not distorted. Absent. The space where she should have appeared remained completely empty. A cold silence swallowed the gate. One of the guards stepped backward so quickly he nearly slipped on the ice. She's cursed. Soraya looked away. There it is. That tone again. Not disgust. Fear. Always fear. The captain's face had gone rigid now. He spoke without looking directly at her anymore. You'll be detained until the council decides what to do with you. Not welcomed. Not trusted. Contained. Soraya almost laughed from exhaustion. Of course. What else had she expected? The guards escorted her through the gates with weapons drawn. Citizens along the fortress street stopped and stared openly as she passed. Whispers spread faster than wildfire. That's her. The Hollowborn. No spirit signature. Look at the mirrors. Every reflective surface reacted as she walked by. Window glass fogged instantly. Silver trays vibrated. Reflections lagged half a second behind movement. People noticed. People always noticed eventually. By the time Soraya reached the inner keep, servants had already begun avoiding the hallways she used. The northern council chamber sat deep. Inside the fortress, Warm firelight spilled across black stone floors. 12 council members waited inside. None looked pleased. And at the center, standing near the great frost-covered windows, was Cale Voren. Soraya felt him before he turned. An overwhelming pressure filled the room instantly. Not aggressive. Controlled. Dangerous in the way winter oceans were dangerous. Cale finally looked at her. And for one impossible moment, the entire chamber went silent enough to hear breathing. Because the visions had not prepared him. Not for this. Not for the exhaustion carved into her face. Not for the loneliness sitting quietly behind silver-gray eyes. Not for the fact that the moment he saw her, the silver wolf inside his chest stopped fighting. Completely. As though it had finally found what it was searching for. Cale's expression remained unreadable. But the frost crawling across the windows behind him spread rapidly outward. Soraya noticed. Of course she did. The council noticed too. One elder rose immediately. Your Grace, he said sharply. This woman carries unstable spirit phenomena. The gate relics reacted violently upon contact. Cale did not answer. His eyes remained fixed on Soraya, studying, calculating. And beneath that, something far more dangerous. Recognition. Soraya straightened instinctively under the weight of it. Then Cale finally spoke. Cold. Measured. Controlled. Remove her weapons, he said. The words hit harder than they should have. Not because of the knife. Because for one brief moment, some foolish part of her had thought he might look at her differently than the others had. But he didn't. Not yet. And disappointment, she realized bitterly, was far more painful than exile. The council chamber of Noctis smelled like cedar smoke, frost, and distrust. Soraya stood alone at the center of the black stone floor, while 12 council elders studied her like something dragged in from deep water. No one offered her a seat. No one asked whether she had survived the journey. Only Cale remained silent near the frost-covered windows, one gloved hand resting behind his back, silver eyes unreadable. The silence stretched too long. Finally, Elder Mailer spoke. Your Grace, he said carefully. With respect, this girl should not remain inside the keep. Girl. Not woman. Not traveler. Certainly not guest. Asterhall exiled her for a reason. Another elder nodded immediately. The mirrors reacted at the gate. She carries no recognized spirit signature. And the relic glass shattered before witnesses. Each accusation landed like stones dropped into still water. Soraya kept her face expressionless. She had learned long ago that defending herself only encouraged people to search harder for flaws. Cale finally moved. Slowly. Controlled. What exactly are you suggesting? He asked. No anger in his voice, which somehow made the room even more tense. Mailer hesitated. That she is dangerous. The silver wolf inside Cale stirred instantly at the word. Dangerous. No. Wrong word. The instinctive response came so sharply it almost escaped his control. Not dangerous. Uncontained. Cale hated how naturally the distinction arrived. He looked toward Soraya again. She stood perfectly still despite the scrutiny around her. But exhaustion sat visibly in the lines of her posture now. Not weakness. The posture of someone who had spent too many years surviving rooms exactly like this one. Cale recognized it because he carried a different version of it himself. Elder Vane rose abruptly. We should test her. The room quieted immediately. Soraya frowned slightly. What kind of test? No one answered her directly. That alone told her enough. Cale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The resonance chamber, Vane continued. If she truly carries no spirit bond, the chamber will expose it immediately. Another elder nodded. And if she is corrupted? The word lingered heavily in the air. Soraya felt something cold move through her chest. Not fear this time. Anger. Small. Sharp. Because even now, after everything, they still needed her to prove she deserved basic humanity. Cale noticed the change in her expression, and something in him reacted immediately. She crossed the black veil alone, he said quietly. Several elders stiffened. That should not have been survivable. Exactly, Mailer replied. Which is why this matters. Cale said nothing after that, but Soraya saw it. The hesitation. The calculation behind his eyes. He didn't trust her either. Not fully. Disappointment settled heavily inside her ribs. Of course he doesn't. Why would he? The council escorted her downward through the fortress shortly after. Deep beneath Noctis. Past ancient halls lined with silver braziers and cracked spirit murals older than recorded history. The air changed as they descended. Colder. Heavier. Alive somehow. Soraya felt it immediately. The deeper they walked, the stronger the strange sensation became beneath her skin. Recognition. Like the fortress itself knew something about her that she did not. The resonance chamber waited at the bottom. Circular. Massive. Its walls formed entirely from polished black mirror stone. Silver symbols glowed faintly beneath the floor. Soraya stopped walking the moment she entered, because every mirror in the chamber turned toward her at once. Not physically. The reflections inside them shifted. Watching, the elders noticed immediately. Unease rippled through the group. One of the spirit knights muttered under his breath, "That's impossible." Kale entered last. The moment he crossed the threshold, the chamber reacted violently. Silver light burst across the floor symbols. The mirrors trembled, and Soraya's reflection appeared in all of them simultaneously. Not delayed this time. Perfectly synchronized. For one heartbeat, relief hit her so hard it hurt. Then the reflection smiled. She hadn't moved. The room froze. Kale's eyes sharpened instantly. The reflections inside the mirror stone began walking independently. Dozens of Sorayas moving through silver glass. Watching the chamber. Watching the elders. Watching him. Fear spread visibly now. One elder stepped backward. "She's controlling them." "No." Kale interrupted quietly. Because he could feel it. This wasn't control. It was recognition. The mirrors weren't obeying her. They were responding to her. The floor symbols suddenly flared blinding white. A shockwave exploded outward through the chamber. Several elders cried out. Soraya staggered backward as silver light climbed the walls like liquid fire. And then, something appeared beneath the stone floor. A symbol. Ancient. Circular. A crescent-shaped eye surrounded by shattered reflections. Every elder in the chamber went pale. Kale stared at it in silence. Because he knew that mark. Not from history lessons. From forbidden archives buried beneath Noctis Keep. Old records sealed centuries ago. The forgotten bloodline. The Mirror Keepers. Elder Mailer whispered first. "No." Another elder looked physically sick. That line was erased. Not erased, Kale said quietly. The silver wolf inside him had gone completely still again. Watching her. Recognizing her. His gaze lifted slowly toward Soraya. Forced into extinction. The room fell silent. Soraya looked down at the glowing symbol beneath her feet. Something deep inside her chest ached suddenly. Not pain. Memory. Not hers. Older. Women standing in silver fire. Cities built from glass. Mirrors used not for vanity, but truth. A voice whispered through the edges of her mind. We were never meant to disappear. Soraya pressed trembling fingers against her temple. What is this? No one answered immediately, because the truth terrified them. Finally Kale stepped forward. Closer than before. Not close enough to touch, but no longer distant. The Mirror Keepers, he said quietly, eyes fixed on her, were not spirit wielders. The silver symbols around the chamber brightened. They were the ones spirits feared. The symbol beneath Soraya's feet burned brighter. Silver light spread across the resonance chamber in slow pulses, like a heartbeat waking after centuries of silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The elders stood frozen around the circle, faces drained of color as ancient mirror stone reflected the impossible truth back at them. Mirror Keeper. The bloodline they had erased from history. Soraya looked down at the glowing mark beneath her boots. Something inside her was unraveling. Not painfully. Naturally. Like chains rusting apart. The Mirror Keepers were executed during the Fracture Wars. Elder Mailer whispered hoarsely. Every archive says the line ended. Kale's gaze remained fixed on Soraya. Archives lie. The words landed heavily in the chamber. Because everyone present understood what he truly meant. People lie. Councils lie. History lies when fear becomes powerful enough. Soraya's pulse thundered beneath her skin. Mirror Keeper. The title should have sounded foreign. Instead it felt horrifyingly familiar. Like hearing the real pronunciation of your own name after a lifetime of being called the wrong thing. The mirrors around the chamber shifted again. This time all the reflections turned toward Kale. Every single one. Watching him. The silver wolf inside his chest surged sharply in response. Recognition. Not hostility. The elders noticed immediately. One of them spoke too quickly. Your Grace, step away from her. Kale didn't move. Another pulse of silver light burst through the floor. Soraya gasped softly. Because the chamber was changing. The black mirror stone walls no longer reflected the present. They reflected somewhere else. Ancient towers beneath moonlight. Women dressed in silver robes standing around enormous circles of fire. A city made entirely of glass and reflection. Alive. Beautiful. Gone. The visions flickered rapidly across the chamber walls like memories trying to claw their way back into existence. Soraya stared in shock. What is happening? Kale answered quietly. The chamber is remembering you. Fear spread visibly through the elders now. Not just fear of Soraya. Fear of what their ancestors had buried. One elder suddenly stepped forward. This is exactly why the bloodline was destroyed. Kale's eyes snapped toward him instantly. The temperature in the room dropped hard enough for frost to spread across the floor. The elder faltered, but kept going. They destabilized spirit law. They corrupted resonance structures. They threatened control. Kale interrupted coldly. Silence crashed down. The elder looked away first. Because everyone in the room understood the truth hidden beneath old history. The Mirror Keepers had not been feared because they were evil. They had been feared because they could not be controlled. Soraya barely heard the argument anymore. The warmth inside her chest was growing stronger. Too strong. Silver light crawled slowly beneath the skin of her hands. The reflections surrounding the chamber began moving faster now. Not random. Urgent. Trying to show her something. One reflection stepped closer from inside the mirror stone wall. A woman. Tall. Silver-eyed. The same figure from the frozen pass. This time Soraya saw her clearly. Not a ghost. Not a monster. A mirror keeper. One of her own. The figure raised a hand slowly toward the glass. Soraya mirrored the movement instinctively. The moment her fingertips touched the mirror, the chamber exploded. Light erupted outward in a violent wave. Every elder was thrown backward. The floor symbols ignited like molten silver. And Soraya screamed. Not from pain. From memory. Thousands of voices crashed through her mind at once. Mirror cities burning. Children hidden beneath silver floors. Women standing against armies of spirit kings. The sound of glass shattering across entire kingdoms. And one final command repeated over and over through generations. Hide her. Hide the last one. Soraya collapsed to her knees. The silver light poured out of her uncontrollably now. Mirrors cracked throughout the chamber. Not breaking, opening. Reflections stepped halfway through the glass all around her. Dozens of silver-eyed figures surrounding the room. The elders panicked instantly. Seal the chamber. She's losing control. Spirit wards now. Knights rushed forward and stopped dead. Because every reflection turned toward them simultaneously. The temperature dropped to freezing. The mirrors darkened. And for one terrible second, the reflections did not look human anymore. Ancient. Endless. Powerful enough to make instinct scream. The spirit knights backed away immediately. Kale didn't. Of course he didn't. He moved toward Soraya instead, directly into the storm of silver light. Your Grace, someone shouted. Kale ignored them. The silver wolf surged violently beneath his ribs as he approached her. Not aggression. Recognition. The closer he got, the stronger the chamber reacted. The symbols beneath the floor brightened until the entire room glowed white. Soraya looked up at him through shaking breaths. I can't stop it. The fear in her voice hit him harder than the magic. Because beneath all this power, she still sounded like someone waiting to be condemned for existing. Kale crouched in front of her slowly. Around them the chamber roared with ancient energy. Mirrors trembling. Silver fire climbing the walls. Reflections watching from inside fractured glass. But his voice remained steady. Look at me. Soraya did. The moment their eyes locked, the chaos hesitated. Just slightly. Enough to breathe. Kale saw it instantly. Not weakness. Anchor. The chamber was reacting to both of them together. The realization hit hard. Dangerously hard. Elder Mailer understood too. His face went white. No. Kale didn't look away from Soraya. What? The elder's voice trembled now. The old records silence. Then quietly. The Mirror Keepers were never destroyed because of their power alone. Kale felt the silver wolf go perfectly still. Waiting. The elder swallowed. They were destroyed because once every few centuries, his eyes moved between Kale and Soraya. One of them bonded with an alpha spirit. The resonance chamber remained sealed for 3 days. Officially, the Northern Council called it a containment precaution. Unofficially, they were terrified. Word spread through Noctis faster than wildfire through dry forest. The Hollowborn girl had awakened the ancient mirrors. The dead bloodline had returned. The Wolf of Noctis had entered the chamber and walked out beside her unharmed. That last part frightened people most. Because Kael Vorin was not a man easily touched by anything. And yet something in the chamber had recognized both of them. Syria heard the whispers everywhere. Servants fell silent when she passed. Spirit knights watched her with guarded eyes. Some people bowed their heads respectfully now. Others crossed themselves against bad luck. Fear had changed shape, but it was still fear. Her room sat high in the eastern tower under constant guard. Not prison guards exactly. Protection, technically. Though Soraya suspected nobody in Noctis fully understood the difference anymore. Rain tapped softly against the tower windows while she stood before the mirror across the room. It reflected her perfectly tonight. No delay. No independent movement. That frightened her more than when it misbehaved. The silence inside herself felt wrong now. Too quiet after the storm in the chamber. A knock sounded at the door. Soraya stiffened instantly. Enter. Kael stepped inside alone. No guards. No council escort. The room seemed smaller the moment he entered it. Not because of physical size. Because he carried presence the way storms carried pressure. Soraya looked away first. You're not supposed to be here alone, she said quietly. That sounds like council language. It is council language. The corner of his mouth almost moved. Almost. He closed the door behind him. For a moment neither spoke. The distance between them felt strangely careful now. After the chamber, everything had changed. Not outwardly. Not officially. But underneath. Like both of them had seen something irreversible and were pretending they still understood the rules of the world afterward. Kael finally broke the silence. How are the mirrors? Soraya blinked once. Of all the questions she expected, that was not one of them. She glanced toward the standing mirror again. Calmer. Are you? No one had asked her that in years. Not sincerely. The realization caught her off guard hard enough to hurt. Soraya folded her arms slowly. You came here to interrogate me? No, then why are you here? Kael studied her quietly. Not her power. Not the silver marks that still occasionally flickered beneath her skin. Her. Which somehow felt far more dangerous. You looked afraid in the chamber, he said at last. The honesty of it unsettled her. Most people only commented on fear when they wanted to weaponize it. You weren't, she asked. Yes. The answer came immediately. No performance. No pride. Just truth. Soraya stared at him. People like Kael Vorin were not supposed to admit fear. Kings were supposed to become stone. Untouchable. But he stood in front of her now, calm and steady, speaking like fear was simply another fact instead of weakness. It disarmed her more effectively than kindness would have. The council thinks I'm dangerous, she said quietly. The council thinks many things. You didn't answer the question. Kael's gaze held hers evenly. Yes, he said. You are dangerous. The words landed heavily between them. Soraya looked away. Of course. There it is. But then he continued. So am I. Silence. Rain whispered softly against the glass. Kael moved slowly toward the window, overlooking Noctis below. Silver lights flickered across the fortress city beneath snowfall. You know what the difference is between power people worship and power people fear? He asked. Soraya frowned slightly. Control. No, his voice remained calm. Familiarity. He looked back at her. People forgive terrifying things once they understand where to place them. Something in her chest tightened painfully. Because suddenly she understood. The Hollowborn label. The exile marks. The hatred. It had never truly been about weakness. People had looked at her and found no category that made them feel safe. And rather than admit uncertainty, they had called her broken. Kael continued quietly. The council spent centuries rewriting the mirror keepers into monsters because monsters are easier to explain than uncertainty. Soraya laughed once under her breath. Tired. So what am I supposed to do with that? Stop apologizing for existing. The words hit harder than any shout could have. She looked at him sharply. Kael's expression never changed. But something in his eyes had softened. Not pity. Recognition. As if he understood exactly how exhausting survival had become for her. You keep waiting, he said quietly, for someone to permit you to deserve space in a room. Soraya's throat tightened unexpectedly. No one had ever said it out loud before. Because no one had ever noticed. Kael stepped closer slowly. Not enough to threaten. Just enough that she could no longer pretend distance protected her. The chamber reacted to you because it remembered what you are, he said. Not what they called you. Her breathing felt uneven suddenly. Dangerously uneven. All my life, she whispered. People looked at me like there was something wrong with me. Kale held her gaze steadily. No, he said softly. They looked at you like there was something wrong with their understanding of you. The room went completely still. And for the first time since childhood, Soraya felt something inside herself loosen. Not healed. Not fixed. Just seen. The mirror beside them shimmered faintly. Their reflections stood side by side in the glass. This time, neither moved incorrectly. Neither disappeared. And for once, Soraya did not look away from herself. The first time Soraya stopped apologizing, it happened by accident. A servant dropped a silver tray when she entered the western corridor. The metal hit the floor with a sharp crack. Every reflection in the polished surface rippled violently. The young servant stumbled backward immediately, face pale with fear. I'm sorry, he blurted out instinctively. Not to her. To the hallway. To the nobles nearby. To the possibility that he had somehow attracted her attention. The old Soraya would have answered automatically. I'm sorry too. Sorry for the mirrors. Sorry for existing near people. Sorry for making rooms uncomfortable. The apology had lived in her mouth for years before she ever noticed it was there. But now, after the chamber, after Kale's words, after finally understanding that fear and hatred were not the same thing, something inside her paused. She looked at the terrified servant kneeling beside shattered silver. And for the first time in her life, she did not shrink to make someone else feel larger. You don't need to apologize, she said quietly. The servant blinked. Confused. The nearby nobles looked even more confused. Soraya simply stepped around the broken tray and continued walking. Her pulse beat strangely hard afterward. Not guilt. Not shame. Something unfamiliar. Relief. Small. Fragile. Real. By the end of the week, the entire keep had noticed the difference. Soraya no longer lowered her gaze when elders entered rooms. She no longer rushed to explain herself whenever mirrors reacted strangely. And most unsettling of all, she stopped trying to convince people she was harmless. That last change disturbed the council deeply. You should be more careful, Elder Mailer warned during one morning assembly. Soraya looked up from the document she had been reading. About what? Perception. The council chamber quieted. Mailer folded his hands tightly. People fear what they don't understand. A familiar sentence. One she had heard her entire life. Only now she finally understood what was hidden beneath it. Behave correctly enough, and maybe they'll let you stay. Soraya leaned back slowly in her chair. No, she said calmly. People choose fear when understanding requires too much effort. The room went still. Several elders looked genuinely shocked she had answered it all. Months ago she would never have challenged them openly. Months ago she still believed surviving depended on being small. Kale sat near the frost-lit windows listening silently. But Soraya noticed the almost invisible shift at the corner of his mouth. Not amusement. Approval. Mailer frowned. You speak boldly for someone under this council's protection. The old instinct flared immediately. Apologize. De-escalate. Make yourself easier to tolerate. Soraya felt it rise automatically, then stop. Because suddenly she realized something devastating. She had spent her entire life negotiating for permission to exist comfortably in rooms that already decided she did not belong. Nothing she said had ever changed that. Nothing she surrendered had ever earned safety. All shrinking had done was make her disappear faster. Soraya looked directly at Mailer. With respect, she said quietly, I was surviving the Black Veil alone while this council debated whether mirrors cracking meant I deserved chains. Silence crashed through the chamber. No one spoke. Because it was true. And truth, she was beginning to learn, made people more uncomfortable than power ever could. Mailer's expression tightened. You misunderstand your position here. No, Soraya said softly. I finally understand it correctly. The silver flames inside the wall braziers flickered suddenly, responding, not to anger, to certainty. Kale noticed immediately. Of course he did. The Mirror Keeper's power did not respond strongest to emotion. It responded to self-recognition. The more Soraya stopped abandoning herself to please others, the steadier the magic became. It was almost frightening to watch. The council felt it too. Fear changed shape again after that. Before, they feared a weapon. Now they feared a woman becoming impossible to diminish. Later that evening, Soraya stood alone on the eastern balcony overlooking Noctis. Snow drifted slowly across the city below. Behind her, the glass doors opened quietly. She didn't turn around. It's becoming harder for them to control the conversation around you, Kale said. Soraya rested her elbows against the frozen railing. Good. The answer surprised even her. Kale stepped beside her. For a while they simply stood in silence beneath the falling snow. Comfortable silence this time. Not empty. Not cautious. Just present. Finally Soraya spoke quietly. When I was 13, one of the spirit mothers told me something during my second trial. Kale looked toward her. She said if I learned how to be quieter, softer, smaller, people might eventually overlook what was wrong with me. The wind moved silver strands of hair across her face. I spent years trying. Kale's jaw tightened faintly. And Soraya laughed softly. A real laugh this time. Not bitter. Just tired of the memory. It never worked. No, Kale said quietly. It wouldn't. She turned toward him slowly. Snow gathered along the shoulders of his dark coat. The wolf of Noctis. Feared by kingdoms. And somehow still the first person who had ever looked directly at her instead of at the space around her. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to do what? Exist without asking permission first. The honesty of it hung painfully between them. Kale was silent for a long moment. Then, you start, he said quietly, by understanding that survival and belonging are not the same thing. Something inside her chest ached softly, because she finally understood. All her life, she had been surviving, making herself easier to swallow, easier to dismiss, easier to exile. But surviving was not living. And for the first time, standing above the lights of Noctis while snow fell around them, Soraya realized she no longer wanted to spend her life begging frightened people to let her stay. If they could not see her clearly, that failure belonged to them now. Not her. The sky above Noctis turned black 3 hours before sunset. Not storm black. Something worse. The kind of darkness that looked alive. From the eastern watchtower, Soraya stood beside Kale as the alarms began ringing across the fortress below. Deep iron bells. One after another. Urgent. The sound rolled through the city like a heartbeat warning the body of injury before pain arrived. Citizens flooded the streets beneath them. Spirit knights rushed toward the eastern gates. And far beyond the frozen cliffs, the world was disappearing. The Ashen had arrived. Not in fragments this time. Not hidden inside forgotten ruins or abandoned valleys. An ocean of living shadow moved across the snowfields toward Noctis itself. The corruption spread unnaturally fast. Everywhere it touched, color died. Ice turned gray. Torches dimmed. Spirit barriers flickered violently. And worst of all, the mirrors across the city began bleeding black. Soraya felt it instantly. The thing beneath the Ashen. Watching her. Waiting specifically for her. Kale's voice came low beside her. It knows you're here. Yes. Neither pretended otherwise anymore. The air itself vibrated now. Citizens collapsed in the streets below as the Ashen reached the outer districts. Not dead. Empty. Their spirit bonds severed instantly. The shadow moved through people like rot through paper. Fast. Hungry. Intentional. Roth burst onto the tower platform, breath sharp in the freezing air. The eastern defenses are collapsing. Kale didn't look away from the horizon. How long? Minutes. Silence. The commander's eyes shifted toward Soraya. We evacuate the lower city now, or we lose everyone trapped there. Kale finally turned. The council. Roth's jaw hardened. Half fled already. Of course they had. Fear always revealed people fastest when survival became expensive. Below them, screams echoed through the fortress. A mirror exploded somewhere deep inside the city. Then another. Then dozens more. Soraya closed her eyes. The Ashen was using reflection pathways now, spreading through glass, through memory, through fear. Ancient instinct rose inside her immediately. Not learned. Remembered. It's targeting the mirrors because that's where my bloodline trapped it before. Kale looked at her sharply. You know that. I know. It now. The words frightened her less than they should have. Because the memories no longer felt foreign anymore. They felt inherited. The Ashen surged closer. Blackness crashed against the outer spirit barrier surrounding Noctis, and the entire fortress shook violently. Cracks split through silver wardstones across the walls. Roth swore under his breath. We can't hold that. No, they couldn't. Not with soldiers. Not with spirit magic. The Ashen wasn't trying to destroy Noctis. It was trying to reach her. Soraya understood suddenly. Every smaller attack, every corrupted site, every mirror reacting to her presence. It had been searching for the last mirror keeper. The realization settled cold and terrible inside her chest. If I leave, she whispered, it follows me. Kale's gaze locked onto hers immediately. No, if I draw it away from the city. No, the word came sharper this time. Not kingly. Personal. Below them, another section of the outer barrier shattered. Darkness poured through the breach like floodwater. Spirit Knights screamed. The ashen consumed entire corridors instantly. Soraya felt the ancient power inside her rise violently in response. Silver light flickered beneath her skin. The mirrors inside Noctis trembled. Waiting. Kale stepped closer. Whatever you're thinking, it wants me, she said. And it doesn't get to have you. The answer hit her hard enough to steal breath. Not because of the words themselves. Because he sounded furious. Not at the situation. At the possibility of losing her. The silver wolf surged beneath his ribs so violently the snow around them exploded outward. Roth stepped back instinctively. Kale barely noticed. His attention never left Soraya. You are not walking into that thing alone. Her throat tightened painfully. You don't understand what it is. No, Kale said quietly. But I understand what happens when people decide your existence is a sacrifice they're willing to make. Silence. The fortress shook again. Closer now. The ashen had reached the inner districts. Citizens fled through snow-covered streets below, while blackness consumed entire buildings behind them. Soraya felt tears sting unexpectedly. Behind her eyes. Not fear. Not hopelessness. Because all her life, every room she entered eventually decided she was expendable. Too dangerous. Too strange. Too difficult to keep. But Kale stood before the end of an entire city, and still refused to let her become the acceptable loss. The realization nearly broke her. The ashen slammed against the central keep barrier. The tower cracked violently beneath them. Silver mirrors along the walls exploded inward. And from every shattered reflection, the darkness began crawling toward her. The final confrontation had already begun. Soraya inhaled sharply. Then slowly, she stopped resisting herself. Not the power. Not the bloodline. Not the reflections. Not the terrible ancient thing inside her that frightened kingdoms. For the first time in her life, she opened the door completely. Silver fire erupted across the tower. Every mirror fragment ignited. The city below froze in stunned silence as enormous walls of reflected light rose around Noctis like unfolding wings. The ashen shrieked. Not triumphantly. Fearfully. Kale stared at her through the storm of silver flame. And suddenly understood why empires once tried to erase the mirror keepers from history. Because this was not spirit magic. This was older. The kind of power that rewrote reality simply by remembering what it truly was. Soraya turned toward the darkness, swallowing the city. Silver light burned in her eyes now. Steady. Ancient. No longer afraid. And somewhere deep inside the ashen, something finally realized the last mirror keeper had stopped running. The sound did not travel through air. It traveled through memory. Citizens collapsed across the city, clutching their heads as black reflections twisted violently inside shattered glass. Spirit Knights dropped to one knee beneath waves of psychic pressure. Even the great silver ward towers lining the fortress walls began cracking under the strain. But Soraya remained standing, at the center of the eastern tower, inside a storm of silver fire. The darkness surged toward her from every direction at once. Hungry, ancient, desperate. And for the first time, she understood what it truly was. Not a creature. Not. Exactly. The ashen was absence itself. A wound left behind when fear became powerful enough to erase entire truths from history. It fed on denial. On severed identity. On people taught to abandon themselves in order to survive. Which meant it had been feeding on her for years. Every exile, every apology, every moment, she made herself smaller so others would feel safer. The realization hit, like a blade sliding free from her chest. Oh, she whispered. The ashen paused. Because suddenly, it could no longer recognize the version of her it had been feeding on. Kale saw the change immediately. The silver fire around her steadied. No longer wild. No longer defensive. Controlled. Not because she mastered it. Because she stopped fighting herself long enough for it to become whole. The mirrors surrounding the city erupted into light. Every reflection in Noctis turned silver white simultaneously. And from inside them, the mirror keepers emerged. Not physically. Echoes. Memories. Ancient women stepping through reflected light all across the city. Citizens stared in stunned silence as silver-robed figures appeared beside the wounded, touching corrupted mirrors and cleansing them instantly. The Ashen shrieked harder. It remembered them. The last time this power awakened fully, entire kingdoms had fallen trying to stop it. Kale stepped through the storm toward Soraya. The silver wolf burned beneath his ribs now, fully unleashed at last. Snow and silver flames spiraled violently around him. The two ancient powers recognized each other instantly. Not predator and prey. Not ruler and servant. Equal. The realization shook the tower harder than the magic itself. Soraya looked at him through blazing silver light. "You should go," she said softly. "No, this may kill me." "No," the answer came immediately. Absolute. For one terrible moment her composure cracked. Because nobody had ever chosen her over safety before. Nobody. The Ashen struck then. A tidal wave of blackness exploded upward through the center of Noctis, smashing through walls and towers as it lunged directly for Soraya. The city screamed. Kale moved instantly. The silver wolf erupted behind him in full manifestation. Massive, luminous, ancient enough to shake the air itself. The spectral wolf collided with the Ashen midair. Silver and darkness detonated across the sky above Noctis. The shockwave shattered every remaining window in the fortress. Soraya staggered as the corruption clawed against the wolf's light. It was too strong, too vast. Even Kale couldn't hold it alone. The Ashen twisted around the spirit beast like oil around bone and drove forward again. Toward her. Toward the last mirror keeper. And suddenly Soraya understood the final truth her bloodline had died protecting. The Ashen could not be destroyed through force. Only recognition. It was born from erased truths. Which meant it survived by making people reject themselves. The moment fear succeeded, it grew stronger. The moment someone abandoned who they truly were, it fed. All her life, she had believed survival meant becoming acceptable. Smaller. Quieter. Less. The Ashen loved that version of her. Because that version was already disappearing. But this woman standing inside silver fire with ancient blood burning through her veins. This version could not be consumed. Because she had finally stopped agreeing with the people who tried to erase her. Tears burned hot down Soraya's face. Not grief. Release. The Ashen lunged one final time. And Soraya opened her arms. Not in surrender. In acceptance. Silver light exploded across Noctis. Not violent. Gentle. Infinite. Every mirror in the city became liquid light. Every reflection aligned perfectly. Citizens looked into shattered glass and saw themselves clearly for the first time in years. Not their fear. Not their masks. Themselves. The Ashen froze. Its darkness trembled violently as silver fire spread through it like dawn through fog. Because the thing born from denial could not survive inside truth. Soraya stepped forward once through the burning light. Then spoke softly into the heart of the corruption. "You do not belong inside me anymore." The world went silent. Completely. The Ashen shattered. Not explosively. Quietly. Like a nightmare losing its shape after waking. Blackness dissolved across the sky in drifting fragments of ash and silver dust. The pressure-crushing Noctis vanished instantly. Color rushed back into the city. The frozen streets brightened. Spirit lights reignited. And throughout the fortress, every mirror cleared. Perfect. Still. Whole. Soraya swayed violently. The silver fire faded around her in slow spirals. Exhaustion hit all at once. Too much power. Too much memory. Her knees buckled, and Kale caught her before she hit the ground. For one long moment neither spoke. Snow drifted softly around them through the shattered tower walls. Below, Noctis stood alive. Breathing. Healed. Soraya looked up weakly. The mirrors. Kale glanced toward the city. For the first time since arriving in Noctis. Every reflection remained perfectly synchronized. No distortions. No delays. No fractured selves. Only truth. Kale looked back at her quietly. "You're finally whole," he said. And for the first time in her life, Soraya believed it. Winter softened slowly after the fall of the Ashen. Not all at once. Noctis had survived. But survival left marks on places the same way it left marks on people. Broken towers still stood wrapped in scaffolding. Spirit wards flickered unevenly some nights. Citizens woke from old nightmares gasping into dark rooms before remembering the corruption was truly gone. Healing, Soraya learned, was quieter than destruction. Less dramatic. More stubborn. 3 weeks after the battle, snow fell gently across the upper terraces of Noctis, while Soraya stood alone inside the eastern observatory. Morning light spilled through towering glass windows. Every mirror in the room reflected her perfectly now. No delays. No independent movement. No shadow watching from somewhere slightly behind herself. At first the stillness unsettled her. After a lifetime of fractured reflections, wholeness felt almost unnatural. But slowly, very slowly, she was learning peace did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived as absence. The absence of fear. The absence of apology. The absence of constantly preparing to be abandoned. A soft knock sounded behind her. Soraya smiled faintly before turning. "You've started knocking." Kale leaned against the doorway, dark coat dusted with snow. "I was informed that." Entering rooms without warning disturbs the Tower Scholars. The Tower Scholars are terrified of you. They recover eventually. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly. That still surprised her sometimes. How easily he made space for quiet moments without trying to own them. Kale stepped farther into the observatory. Sunlight caught silver along the edges of his hair. The silver wolf inside him had changed after the battle too. Calmer now. No longer pacing restlessly beneath his ribs, searching for something lost. It had found her. The realization still frightened him occasionally. Not because of the bond itself. Because of how naturally it fit. Soraya watched him approach the window beside her. Below them, Noctis moved steadily through morning life. Merchants reopening frost-covered stalls. Spirit knights rebuilding eastern barricades. Children running through snow with silver ribbons tied around their wrists in imitation of the old Mirror Keeper symbols now painted throughout the city. Noctis no longer spoke her name in whispers. That was perhaps the strangest change of all. They repaired the southern bridge, Kale said quietly. "I saw. Roth claims the workers spent more time arguing about your murals than rebuilding the structure." Soraya huffed a soft laugh. The murals had not been her idea. After the battle, artists throughout Noctis began painting silver mirrors across walls and towers as symbols of restoration. At first it embarrassed her deeply. Then Elder Mailer, who now looked perpetually exhausted whenever she entered council chambers, informed her the city had collectively decided she was becoming impossible to mythologize quietly. So she stopped fighting it. Another small kind of healing. The observatory fell comfortably silent again. Outside, snow drifted through pale morning light. Kale finally spoke. "The Southern Territories sent formal requests this morning." Soraya sighed immediately. "How many?" "7. Gods." A rare flicker of amusement crossed his expression. "They wish to establish diplomatic relations with the last Mirror Keeper." "I hate that title." "I know." She leaned lightly against the window frame. "I spent my entire life trying not to be noticed," she murmured. "And now?" Soraya looked out over Noctis quietly. Now people saw her everywhere. Not as hollow-born, not as cursed, but as something ancient returned to the world. It still felt unreal some mornings. "Now," she said softly, "I think maybe disappearing was never the same thing as peace." Kale looked at her then. Really looked. Not at the power beneath her skin. Not at the silver fire that still occasionally shimmered through mirrors when she passed. At her. The woman who survived exile after exile and still somehow learned softness again afterward. "You've changed this territory," he said quietly. Soraya smiled faintly without looking at him. "So have you." He didn't answer immediately. Because that was true too. The wolf of Noctis no longer felt carved entirely from winter and discipline. Something warmer lived in the spaces between his silences now. Not weakness. Never weakness. Just openness. The kind only trust could create. A breeze moved gently through the observatory. The mirrors around them reflected morning light in soft silver patterns across the floor. Soraya watched the reflections for a long moment. Then quietly. "When I was younger, I used to pray before every summoning ceremony." Kale remained still beside her. "I kept asking the spirits to make me normal." A small laugh escaped her. "I thought if I became acceptable enough, eventually someone would choose to keep me." Pain flickered briefly through Kale's expression. Not pity. Anger at the memory itself. Soraya turned toward him fully now. "I don't think I want that anymore." "No." She shook her head slowly. "I don't want to be kept because I finally became easy to understand." The silver wolf stirred softly beneath Kale's ribs. Neither of them looked away. Snow fell quietly beyond the glass. Then Kale stepped closer. Not hurried. Not demanding. Just certain. You were never difficult to keep, he said softly. The words hit deeper than grand declarations ever could have. Because she believed him. Completely. Soraya felt something inside her settle at last. Not the violent awakening from the chamber. Not the fire of battle. Something gentler. A life finally. Lowering its defenses. She rested her head lightly against his shoulder. Carefully at first. As if expecting the moment to vanish. Kale did not move away. Outside, the city of Noctis breathed beneath fresh snowfall and silver morning light. And for the first time in her life, Soraya understood what belonging actually felt like. Not ownership. Not permission. Not survival. Peace. Within the mirrors. Within the city. Within herself. Finally. Whole. And maybe that was the real miracle all along. Not the silver fire. Not the ancient bloodline. Not even the power that saved an entire kingdom. But the fact that a girl the world called broken finally stopped believing it. So if this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. What do you think hurt Soraya more? Being rejected by the world, or spending years rejecting herself first? And if you've ever felt too different, too unwanted, or too difficult for people to understand, maybe this story was meant for you too. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more dark fantasy stories about healing, power, and finding where you truly belong. See you in the next story.